there. Can you hear me and see me okay?
I can hear you very well. I can see you perfectly, and I love those earrings.
Thank you. They're from a small women's collective in Bangalore. And
Beautiful.
they make these beautiful recycled, everything's made from recycled materials.
Wow. What do you know the name of that collective?
I can send it to you because I want to buy more from them because all the people that create it are women who kind of need, support in their lives. So I kind of really support what they do. I will send it to you so we can
For
both shop
sure.
from and do
For
a good
sure.
deed as well.
For sure. And I'm very excited to have you here. So before we start, let me introduce you. Sangeeta Pillai, activist, writer, and speaker, founder of the South Asian feminist network Soul Sutras, which tackles cultural taboos, something we all need to tackle. Your Masala's podcast on Spotify has been making waves, including being splashed across global billboards, like in New York too.
That's been amazing.
Masala podcast deals with sex, sexuality, shame, periods, and other taboos. And wow, kudos. You were nominated for 2 British Podcast Awards. Hats off to you, Sangeeta. You also created Masala Monologues, a series of writing workshops and theatre shows in the UK and the US. You've been featured in the Evening Standard, Eastern Eye, Huffington Post, BBC Asian Radio, Brown Girl Magazine, and you've been writing for over 20 years. You're a fellow writer like me. We have to exchange some writing tips. So welcome, Sangeeta, and thanks for joining our live session.
Thank you so much, Mona. It's a real joy to be part of this conversation with you. We met, was it now 5 months ago, maybe in London when I was here, and had a lovely conversation about podcasting and, all the things we do. So it's a real joy. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So let me start. The first question I have for you. You've said you began your journey as a good Indian woman, a good Indian daughter, and now you call yourself a bad beti. So can you explain what you meant by being a good Indian girl and what made you decide to break free and follow your own path?
So as Indian women or South Asian women, it doesn't matter if you come from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or you've grown up in the US or the UK. We all grew up with these kind of codes of what we're supposed to be and who we are, right? Our parents tell us, the relatives, the aunties, the uncles, that you've got to, always be quiet, not raise your voice, don't question the elders, agree to marry somebody, have children, never kind of voice any opinion that's different to what you're being told. So that to me is the good Indian girl or the, or good South Asian girl, whatever you want, a good Pakistani girl, good Bangladeshi girl, whatever you want to call it. And growing up, I was very aware that these were the rules I was supposed to follow. And unquestioningly, like if I asked, for example, I remember asking my mother, we don't go to the temple on our period. And I'm like, but why? If you say God made us, then why can't we talk to God? And it was like, you're always asking these questions. You're always kind of back answering. That was what I was told. So I decided, I think very early on, and it was a subconscious decision. It wasn't really a conscious decision, that I didn't like these rules, that I decided that these rules didn't work for me. These rules weren't for my good. It was for the good of society that I'd been told at large. And I decided to never follow those rules. I decided not to get married at that point. I decided not to choose a nice, safe job. I decided I didn't want kids. So there were a lot of kind of decisions that I was being told that as a good Indian girl, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I said, well, I'm not doing any of those things. So it goes back a long way. I think for me, it was a very subconscious kind of decision. It's only now that I look back and I think, wow, I was saying those things right from a very, very young age. So I hope that answers your question.
It actually stimulated another question in me too. It did answer it, yes, but makes me think maybe you took these decisions like a couple of decades ago or 15 years ago. Do you look back and regret any of them?
Not a single thing. I get asked this all the time, particularly the one with the kids. I have friends who've known me a very long time. And my friend a couple of weeks ago said, do you ever regret not having children? I'm like, no, not even for a millisecond. Like I always, always knew that my purpose in this world was a bigger purpose. Like I'm not here to look after one, two, or three people. I'm here to look after a lot of people, a lot of women, young South Asian girls, women who haven't had the opportunities that we had. So to look back, no, every single decision that I took in my entire life has brought me to this point. And there is not a single regret, not even one.
That's awesome. So tell me, taking that decision as a young girl, how did it impact your relationship with your parents? And has it changed at all? Are you still like, how did they take it?
So it was very difficult for them, I think, because I grew up in Bombay we called it Bombay then, in the 1980s, 90s, and nobody was saying the things I was saying in the circles that we lived in. So I think it was very hard for them. And a lot of the neighbors would say, oh, what does your daughter do? And we don't really understand, and blah, 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 what's wrong with her, etc., etc. So I think it was very hard on them. And I do feel bad that they kind of had to experience those things, but I couldn't be any other person. It was who I was, and I was being true to myself then, and I'm being true to myself now. It's all I can do. And I believe genuinely that it's all we can do is to be true to our own kind of spirit. Now neither of them is here. They both died. So I guess it doesn't really matter what I do anyway.
But did they ever come around to your decision? And I'm asking because, there are other girls in a similar situation who are scared to take that step,
Yeah. I think not directly, because my mother died in 2003, so a long time ago. And so I believe, and I genuinely believe this from the bottom of my heart, that if she was around today, she'd be bloody proud of me. And I wish she was around today, because she'd look at that billboard in New York and say, that's my daughter.
Yeah.
I really believe she would have been proud. But sadly, I lost her a long time ago, and it still hurts, but it's just one of those things. And my dad, we've had very difficult relationship. He was an alcoholic. He was very violent. So we didn't really have a relationship in that sense. So I don't really count him. He was kind of there, but not really there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So a young girl growing up in Bombay from a conservative family, you decided Bengaluru, or Bangalore as we called it at that time, and then London beckoned. How did you find the courage to move? And how did you deal with the challenges of being a single Desi woman in such uncharted territory? Because in those days, young girls did not move out unless they got married.
Yeah. And actually, when I moved from Bombay to Bangalore, that was the big move, because I had been trying to leave home for 10 years. I didn't manage it because, as you know, girls only left. My mother, people would quote this, either in her, what's the word for?
In her sari,
bridal,
yeah,
either in your funeral procession or your, doli, or. I mean, what a stupid thing to teach girls, right? When you think about it, it's like you leave your parents' home either when you're dead or you're married. I'm like, really? Those are my two choices? But basically, that's what I was told. So I kept trying to find a job in another city, because that was the only way I could get out. It took me 10 years of I don't even know how many hundreds of jobs I applied for. And finally, I landed a job in Bangalore in another advertising agency, and I moved. So that was the big move for my family. It was like, wow, you're moving away, you're not married, you're going to live on your own. And I didn't know anyone in Bangalore. I didn't even have a place. I kind of moved to the company kind of accommodation, temporary accommodation, and figured my way out. So that was the big one. When I moved to the UK, I moved with my ex-husband. So I met this English guy who I met on a beach in Goa, and we got married. As you do. And we moved, he wanted to stay in India and I wanted to move to the UK. So obviously we moved to the UK. So that's how I moved to the UK. So when I first moved here, I did have him kind of with me, but Again, it was completely uncharted territories because I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. Neither of us had jobs or money. Didn't have any friends. So it was really, really hard. So the first kind of 4 years, I think it was really difficult. Like, really couldn't even buy coffee, like difficult, that kind of, it was hard. But I had a feeling about the UK. I really felt like London would be good for me, and it has been. So the marriage ended. I kind of, decided to get a divorce and kind of move out. And London is a good city for someone like me who doesn't necessarily follow the rules, and London lets you be, and you can be whoever you want to be and do whatever you want to do. So that's how it's kind of worked out.
I just want to roll back a little bit and ask you, in the West, there are already examples of young girls living by themselves, but in India, it's not as common. So when you went to Bangalore, what kind of hurdles did you face when it came to living alone and getting a place of your own? And then you said you went to Goa. So even traveling alone as a young girl.
Yeah, it was still, it has changed, to be fair. I don't know if anyone from India is listening to this conversation. Every time I go back, I see a lot of young women doing their own thing, moving to new cities, so I think it has changed. But the time that I was doing this, which is like late 90s, it was still pretty unheard of. So the challenges were things like every man would hit on you just when he heard that you lived on your own. It was like you were fair game, including married men whose wives were giving birth, right? So it was so common. So if you were a single woman living alone in a new city, you were fair game. So that was a big one. Again, also finding accommodation, you get asked a lot of questions, if you wanted to rent a flat by yourself, like, are you alone? Blah, blah, blah. There was a lot of suspicion of that. And then a lot of simple stuff that I'd never done. I'd refused to learn to cook because it was like, oh, all Indian girls learn to cook. So I'm like, I'm not going to learn to cook, which was a really bad move on my part because when I moved out, I'm like, oh shit, I need to know how to cook. So I had to learn that. And then basics, right? Which if you as a young person have never done that, how do you pay your electricity bills? How do you get the shopping? How do you store it? How do you cook? How do you clean? If you're not cleaning yourself, how do you organize that? All the kind of practicalities of things that, say, your parents did for you, you've got to figure it out. So those were the challenges, really. But I didn't really care because for the first time in my life, I was answerable to no one. I was living on my own at this tiny little flat in Bangalore. And I had this little balcony. You could just barely stand on it. It was so small. But I felt like the queen of the world. Like I was like, okay, this is all mine. No one can tell me what to do. So I was happy.
It's interesting because in a similar way, I got divorced after almost 25, 28 years in a marriage where everything was taken care of. So when I got divorced and left, I was hit on by married men. It was really difficult to try and date again as a divorced woman because everybody looks at you as a certain type of woman. And I didn't know how to, file taxes. I didn't know how to pay electricity bills. So I had to learn everything. And we're talking about like very recent compared to what you were doing and in India. Anyway, I think things are changing a lot in India, and that's a good thing. But talking about breaking taboos, which is what you do, India is the land of the Kama Sutra. So why do you think sex is such a taboo topic in South Asian households?
I've thought about this a lot, and I feel like over the years, so yes, we're the people that wrote the Kama Sutra and the Anangaranga, and there's a lot of erotic texts that our people have written, right? And it was very liberal. If you ever read the Kama Sutra, it talks about female pleasure and female orgasms very openly. It talks about gay relationships. There's a lot of it. I feel like over the years, maybe with different kinds of people ruling over India, whether that's the British, they came with their own Victorian sense of morality, where you couldn't show your ankle. That was considered like inflammatory by the Victorians. So they brought their own morality, and I don't think it's just the British. I think multiple kind of rulers came and kind of ways of thinking came. And I think also it's a power thing. Like, I really believe this. The minute you stop women accessing their own bodies. The minute you introduce shame into their idea of sexuality, you have control. And I think using sex to control women is as old as time. Or this whole kind of slut shaming and all of that. What is that? It's saying, if I think you're this, it means you're in my power. So I think it's a complicated answer. I don't think there's a simple answer to say, hey, we had the Kama Sutra and then this happened and then we became weird about sex. I think over the years and decades and centuries, things happened. And I really think it's all to do with controlling women, because if women are allowed agency over their bodies, over their sexuality, over their orgasms, and suddenly you're like, you can't manage these people. They're like these wild creatures, they can do anything they like. So I think it's to do with that.
So let me ask you, first of all, I agree with you about the British and Islamic invaders and all of them who, blouses, Indian women didn't wear blouses, the British were the ones who introduced them, right? But having said that, that was then. And now we're looking at today, right? Women are taking control in many ways. So you think it's still men trying to say it's all shameful and trying to control women? Because today also, South Asian women titter or, stay away from topics to do with sex. I've asked a lot of younger girls in their 20s and they're like, no, we can't talk about that. I can't even say that word. My parents would be appalled. Today.
Yeah.
So what is it that men are fearful about, and wanting to keep women suppressed? Is that what it is? This power play?
I think that's part of it. I think shame is a very powerful tool. The minute you shame somebody, you take away their power. It's almost like this Achilles heel. If you say to me that, Sangeeta, I don't know, you smell or whatever, I become smaller. I suddenly will not be the person that I am. It's a very big power move, I think. And then over centuries, what's happened, I think, is we've shamed women so much about their bodies and their sexuality that women now do that to each other. Patriarchy is kind of dirty game. What I say is that they don't even have to do anything. We do that to each other now. We'll go to a party, we'll see a woman wearing something that we think is sexy, too sexy or revealing, and say, oh my God, what does she think she's doing? So we're doing that game, right? And I think it's sad that the younger women that you're speaking to, some of them are like, oh my God, we can't even say that word, because how I wish I could be part of this conversation. You are part of this conversation, Seema.
I was just going to say, Seema, if you have a question, just type it in and we will.
Pop it in. Exactly. It's a chat. So, you're very welcome to say. So it's a real shame because I like to think we are full bodies. We are spirit and body, and all of it is together. And our sexuality is a key part of us. And if you read, like our own literature, right, talks about how sexual energy can be harnessed. Tantra, what is Tantra? Tantra talks about using sexual energy in every area of your life, your health, your work, your everything, right? So when you suppress this very, very key part of you, and it's not our fault, because we are picking up messaging that's been passed on from generations. Our parents have said that, their parents have said that to them, their parents have said that to them. So it's so deeply embedded in most in our kind of genetic makeup that we've got to consciously try and say, oh, hang on a minute, you're saying this to me, but actually that's not true. That's when we start to change this conversation, and that's when we start to really own our own power, sexually, intellectually, whichever way you want to call it.
Do you have any examples of where this kind of discussion has led to a change for somebody and how they started owning themselves and made a difference in their lives?
Absolutely. I run a lot of workshops. I run podcasting workshops. I run kind of workshops for women around bodies and sex. And I always talk about this exercise where I ask women who are part of my workshop to just spend some time looking at themselves in the mirror. Take your clothes off, go somewhere private, light a few candles, whatever makes you feel good, and just look at yourself. And it is is one of the most triggering things you can do. And why is it triggering? Because we've been made to feel that to be sexy, you've got to be this size, you've got to be this shape, you've got to be this color, you've got to be this age. And a lot of that stuff comes up. Somebody's saying,
Seema's had a question, yeah.
I think a lot of people have not really explored the depth of what it requires to have really good sex. Yes. Or a really good relationship with your own body. Sex comes secondary. Sex is with other people is secondary. Even our relationship with our own body is so fraught with so much angst. And this exercise that I'm talking to you about, like standing in front of a mirror, brings up all of that, because you're like, oh my God, I'm not this, I'm not that, my this is too that, and my that is too big, or whatever. But that in itself, again, women have written to me and to say that's one of the most powerful things I've ever done, because it makes me look at myself and like, wow, you know, I have this body and it's beautiful and it's powerful. So that simple thing can change how you think.
Yeah, wow. I mean, we should, hopefully all our viewers are listening to it, you know, just stand in front of the mirror and appreciate what you have and highlight the good parts rather than looking at it in a negative sense.
Yeah. Look at how beautiful you are. You know, we all are.
Absolutely.
We are beautiful.
And the other thing I feel like it's pretty much, it could be a subcontinent South Asian taboo, is the fact that women are scared to masturbate. Like they don't think it's good to pleasure yourself. And if they knew how to do that, then they would have so much better intimacy in their own marriages or relationships.
Absolutely. And again, it comes down to what we've just said, which is the sexual relationship you have with yourself doesn't exist for a lot of South Asian women in particular. Again, this is not your fault, because you've been shamed, you know, even before you've kind of taken the first step. I talk about this like chi-chi, if you're in, you know, if you're growing up in a Hindi household, or aye, or whatever language you've grown up. Hi there. Grown-ups, it's one of the first words you hear. So you associate being your naked body with being dirty. And that's how you start in life as a child. So no wonder then as you go forward, how is it possible to then build that relationship with your own pleasure?
Yeah.
So masturbation is very difficult for a lot of South Asian women, because it requires you to sort of look at yourself. It requires you to actively create an instance where you give yourself pleasure, maybe give yourself an orgasm, whatever. So it's very, very difficult if you associate shame with the act of sexuality. And then if you can't even pinpoint what gives you pleasure, how are you going to tell your partner what gives you pleasure? How are you going to do that? So, you know, there's this massive part of us that we are just not accessing. Again, not our fault, because those are the messages we've grown up internalizing. But, you know, that's all the trauma and the angst around masturbation there.
Tell me, as a Desi woman, you decided you're going to stand in front or, you know, talk to audiences about South Asian women owning their voices, bodies, and sexual pleasure. Have you had any trolling? Have you had any pushback from Desi women saying, what the hell are you doing? I mean, I understand as a young girl in India and you left and you came to England where people are more emancipated, but how has it worked for you in London?
Surprisingly, touch wood, I haven't had much trolling. Like, I don't know. I think I've just been very lucky and blessed, and somebody up there is looking after me. But I've had primarily really, really positive messages from the women that follow my work. They tell me how much they loved my work. They listen to the podcast. They tell me how it's helped in their own lives, how it's changed their lives. You know, so I've had like 99% positive feedback.
Oh,
I might get the odd guy popping up in my DMs or something, which I just ignore, you know, like, what are you going to do? But to be very honest with you, it has been really, really, really positive, and I feel very, very blessed about that, actually.
Oh, that's awesome. Tell me, have you ever had a situation where somebody has asked you something in your workshop or brought up an incident or something in their lives that has stumped you?
That has?
Stumped you, like, you know, you've never had that before. And
not yet, but I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm not the guru, you know. So, and I never approach anything in that way as well. I'm like, I'm here to facilitate something that I think is important. And it's a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
And you might do something that I've never heard of, in which case I'll say, I don't know about that. I'll go, teach myself, and then I'll come back and let you know.
Yeah.
So I think, I feel like I am certainly not the expert. I'm just somebody who's standing up and speaking mostly about the things that have happened to me, and which then help other people, because a lot of people feel similar things in our culture.
And they're scared to talk about it.
Yeah.
So on Masala podcast, how many interviews have you done so far, and how do you pick the women you interview?
So Masala podcast is 4 seasons old. I've done 42 episodes, 42 guests, 42 episodes. And the guests now kind of approach me, or their PRs approach me, especially the kind of more high profile. They kind of listen to the podcast or they hear about it, and then the PR gets in touch. But the first season, when I was completely unknown and I was unknown, I would just look at people's social media and I would have a sense of who they were. And to me, the most important kind of criteria in terms of selecting the guest is they've got to be authentic. They've got to like really embody that thing they're talking about. So whether it's mental health, whether it's menopause, whatever it might be, their topic is, they've got to feel very, very strongly, and their work has to be about that. So that's kind of the only criteria. Are you authentic? Do you really embody this thing that you're talking about? Is this real? Like, I'm not interested in like somebody pushing something, like obviously we'll talk about whatever it is, your book or your podcast or whatever it is, but it has to be the cause. The cause is the most important thing. The activism is the most important thing to me.
Right. And any interesting, for people who've never heard any of your podcasts, any podcast that stood out for you, like you were like, wow, that was awesome.
Wow, so many episodes. Like it's being asked to pick your favorite child. This is slightly difficult. I just think of a few at the top of my head. The episode with Anushka Shankar was a really powerful one. She talks about being groped as a child. Like that was quite hard. So we talk about sexual harassment and women and bodies. So that was a really powerful episode, I think. Again, she was really authentic and she was really true. And you can hear that on the podcast. Another really fun one that I always recommend to people who've not listened to my podcast is the episode with Sahara Night. I think it's season 3. She's a porn star. She's a Muslim South Asian porn star. And she talks about her family didn't know she was a porn star. And there's a whole, she's on Babe Station talking to somebody. And there's a call that comes through and it's her mother.
Oh my gosh.
Her daughter's a porn star. So that's quite a funny episode, So yeah, a couple.
And broadly, what kind of topics have you dealt with on your podcast? The more common topics.
Yeah. So Masala Podcast and Soul Sutras, which is the platform that I run, are all about taboos in our culture, taboos that our women face. So everything from sex, sexuality, periods, porn, mental health, menopause. I've dealt with all of these. And some I've dealt with more than one. So mental health, I've done 2 episodes on. Sexuality, I've interviewed a lot of queer women because that's really difficult in our culture again. I've done menopause 2 episodes as well because I'm also coming up to that age, so I'm really interested in it. So yeah, pretty much any taboo is what I cover, including, and this has been educational for me, where I didn't think something was a taboo and it appears it is, like divorce. I would think like, oh, it's 2023, like who cares? But people do care. It's still a taboo, and women that are divorced are still stigmatized. So I did a whole episode on divorce with this divorce lawyer based in India. Yeah, any taboo in our culture is what I will talk about. And I think there's a lot of, somebody asked me, like, will you ever run out of taboos? I said, I don't think so. There's a lot of taboos in our culture.
I was just going to ask, and also something like, is there a common thread amongst some of the taboos, like period? Is there a common taboo, or, for menopause, or, having sex?
There is, like, I feel like the big taboo is women's bodies. like our bodies, like we're not given agency of our own bodies in our culture, and also in like, and that's just not South Asian culture, in kind of mainstream culture as well. So it comes up a lot, like the issue or the taboo is related to the body. So you think about it, periods, taboo, menopause, taboo, sex, taboo, porn, taboo. What do all these have in common? Our bodies, right? Because our bodies are never supposed to belong to us.
So what's your top advice for women to overcome this taboo and overcome, okay, fine, period taboos and all that, but also overcome sexual fear? And, you know, what kind of advice can you give women for that?
I would say start getting comfortable with yourself. That kind of mirror exercise that I mentioned is a really good starting point. Start to get comfortable with who you are. Start to look at yourself through the eyes of a lover. You know, don't be so critical, because this kind of hypercritical voice that we've all got, including me and you and everybody else, is not our own voice. It's kind of the voice of media and society. So start to kind of, it sounds really cliche, but look at yourself with love to begin with, because that's what stops us accessing our own pleasure. It's that voice, like, oh, you're too blah, fill in the blank, right? Whatever, my blah might be different to yours. The minute you start to take that away, you'll automatically find your relationship with your own sexual pleasure getting easier, because that's what stops us. It's that kind of angst and trauma that is attached to us accessing our own bodies and our own pleasure. So I would say start small. Don't do anything big and scary. You don't have to go buy a sex toy if that doesn't work for you. You can do that, of course, but you don't have to. Start to see yourself, start to appreciate yourself, start to kind of think of how things feel in the body, like how does rain feel on your skin, or how does music make you feel? Like explore your senses first. And I think that's a really beautiful, gentle way to start getting in touch with your body. Once you are more comfortable with your body, sexual pleasure will follow, because we've all got that within us. It's like our birthright. We've come into the world, you know, with sexual pleasure. It's just that the world's kind of taken it away from us.
That's so interesting. Like, if something's being made, inhale it, get the fragrance, try and understand the subtlety behind it, and, you know, activate your senses, and then you'll be able to. It's the whole love yourself so that others can love you kind of a theory.
Okay, exactly. Beautifully said. Exactly.
And Sangeeta, before we end this conversation, what's next for you?
So the big exciting thing that I'm doing is the next season of Masala podcast, which is a US special where you are based.
Okay.
So I have interviewed 11 amazing South Asian American women, like the editor of Vogue magazine, Hollywood producers, Hollywood actors. Like they're big names, and they're awesome South Asian women, all based in the States. And the feel of this season is slightly different. It's more celebratory. Rather than, we are talking about taboos, but we're also celebrating our culture and celebrating who we are. So that's dropping on the 31st of August, which is like not that far away. So please go and listen and subscribe to Masala Podcast. If you type in Masala Podcast into any of your podcast apps, or even on Google, I will come up. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be an amazing season. I'm super, super excited. Yeah, so that's what's coming up next.
How exciting. Oh my gosh. So you're going to come to the US and when it launches?
Yes, absolutely. The plan is to kind of have a launch party for Masala Podcast somewhere in maybe early November. I'm really gutted you'll not be there, because I was hoping you'd be there. But I'll be in the US, and I'm hoping to meet a few people as well. Meet a few more South Asian American women, because I've really enjoyed the conversations on this podcast, and it's kind of broadened my own understanding of what it is to be a South Asian woman today in different parts of the world, because it's sort of similar but at the same time quite different, and I've really, really enjoyed that process. So I'll be there, and I'll be here. Maida, absolutely, would love to see you. So I'll once it's done, I'll post on my socials where it's going to be, where the party's going to be, where I will be. And I'd love to meet people and get to know people.
So Maida, of course, is the co-founder of EkWomen. who you
Oh,
still haven't
really?
met.
Hi. Sorry, I didn't know that. Would love to see you later.
For sure, for sure. And I think, does anybody have any questions before we let her go? I think this has been such a fascinating, eye-opening conversation. Thank you very much. And remember, you can catch Soul Sutras on any of your podcasting platforms. Just type it in, Masala Podcast, and no, Masala Podcast.
The
Sorry,
Masala
Soul Sutras is your
podcast.
platform.
If you type in Masala Podcast into any of your browser or your podcast platforms, you'll find me. My website and my platform are called Soul Sutras. That's soulsutras.co.uk. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all under Soul Sutras. So you come find me, say hello, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta. This was a really great conversation, and good luck with the US launch.
Thank you. I'm really excited. I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah, I can imagine, because this will be huge and big. And it's nice to keep reinventing yourself and doing something different, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And Seema, thank you so much. Thank you for your question too. She's like, thank you, you guys are rocking. Our guest is rocking. So take care, bye. And I know it's late in the evening, so have a good evening and good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.